You don't have to look very hard to find the sentiment that back in the day, things were better. And it's no different for something as niche as anime games. Back then, developers actually cared about giving us open worlds to explore. Back then, they would give us the rosters that we truly deserved. Nowadays, it's nothing but cash grabs. There's no passion anymore. All they care about is money. So I gotta ask the question, did anime games get worse? No, they have not. Thanks for watching. Check out this video on Is Gear 5? In all seriousness, no, I don't think they got worse, but I do get where the feeling comes from. All the best anime games have one thing in common. They all came out in the past. And when looking at the past and digging through our memories, we tend to remember only the good stuff. But bad anime games have always been around us. In fact, it wasn't modern anime games that got them the reputation of cash grabs. It was a lot of the old stuff. But then we also think back to the good games, the ones that we imagined playing in our childhood, and we say to ourselves, no, a game like this never came out again. This was way better than anything they're putting out nowadays. And while that may be true sometimes, you also may be forgetting about something. There are so many anime games that I thought I liked, and I wish I had never replayed them. The Naruto Ultimate Ninja series was my entire childhood. I strongly believed that those games were better than the Storm games for the longest time, until I replayed them. Ultimate Ninja 5 in particular was so disappointing, and I know, great game, let me explain. Back when I played all the Naruto games again to completion, I ranked this game much lower than most people would. And if I had played the Japanese version and understood Japanese perfectly, of course, I would have rated this so much higher. But because I played the only English version that exists, the PAL version, that means I played a game that was slowed down by about 20%, because CC2 did not know how to convert 60 FPS to the PAL version. So the whole game just felt sluggish all the way through, and you wanna know what's crazy? That's the version that I played as a kid. Did I think it was sluggish? No, I didn't feel it at all, but that's why I am saying I've got more examples. Dragon Ball GT Final Bout. I love that game so much. I could finally play as Super Saiyan 4 Goku. I was in love with GT back then. I must have been like 8 years old when I played this. And now there is no one in the entire world that can convince me that Final Bout is a better game than Dragon Ball FighterZ. If you want proof that anime games are not getting worse, I mean, just look at those two. I believe anime games are improving, and they're improving so much that I'm putting together a massive event called Ultimate Burst. If you've missed the announcement last month, Ultimate Burst is an anime game festival that I'm holding on September 2nd and 3rd. We've got 4 main games for tournaments, and a total of 10 side tournaments have applied since. Why am I suddenly talking about this? Well, because signups are live right now. For the main games, you can sign up on the AGC Discord, and for the side games, you have a list of servers where the tournaments will be. If anime games were getting worse, I don't think I would host this event, but also there are some old games in there that I think have survived the test of time, and that's also important to recognize. Oh, also, announcing prize pools. $250 for each of the main games. So it's a $1,000 event plus Matcherino claim codes, and donations will come through, and side games are also getting Matcherino and codes and all of that stuff. Sign-ups and more info over on the AGC Discord. But you know what? Maybe it's too easy for me to just show you some bad old games and compare them to the rare occasional good game that comes out nowadays. But you see, the reason why it's so easy to find bad games back in the day is because they used to take bigger risks. Video games are getting more and more expensive to develop and taking a lot longer too, and nowadays no one wants to spend 5 years developing a game, spending money on it, only to see it flop. Even worse, no one wants to do all that, promise you 4 seasons of DLC, and watch it flop all the way through launch and its continued life cycle.
What were they thinking?
But because back in the day it was cheaper and faster to develop, and also there was no DLC, publishers were required to put out a different game every year just to keep a certain anime license. That clause still exists, by the way, in a lot of contracts. It's just that season passes also count now, so that's how they bridge a lot of the years. But we had a lot more stuff, and naturally, a lot of those ended up being experiments. And this is ultimately why I think it's so much easier to find bad games from back then, because now they just play it safer. I also think part of this was due to the console ecosystem. Nowadays, if you develop a console game, you can just put it out on everything, Xbox, Switch, PlayStation. But back then, games were not developed the same for all the different consoles. Consoles were literally built different. So very often we would get different games for the different platforms, and that also helped with variety and sometimes even competition between 2 different studios. Some of those games ended up being absolute gems that we would not have seen otherwise, and others ended up being complete train wrecks that had to be rushed for release. Now, just because they play it safer nowadays doesn't mean there's no risks. There are still risks nowadays, and some of them are really good. For instance, My Hero Ultra Rumble, so far what I've played of it, I love it, and it's an anime battle royale, the first of its kind. I mean, okay, technically not exactly the first of its kind, kind, but using the modern Battle Royale formula with the circle getting smaller and you have a loot phase, you have a combat phase. Yeah, it's the first one. And sure, Battle Royale games are popular. This seems like a safe bet, but if you take a closer look at the genre, there are more recorded failures than success stories when it comes to Battle Royales. So I'd say it's probably still a risk. But then some other risks are just pretty off. Like, I respect the idea of a Black Clover Overwatch game, but this is just not what the fans of the show were looking for. Not to mention, Black Clover itself was risky back then. It was a very polarizing anime. I don't know if this game would be successful, even if it was a completely different genre. But that takes me into my next point. Without being willing to take so many risks, because games are taking longer to develop, we end up getting a lot of games that are from the same genre, usually RPGs or arena fighters, but more importantly, we end up with less anime IP getting their chance to shine, because publishers are playing it safe in both the genre of the game and the anime that they choose to adapt. And the result is that we get, 1, less games. No one is to blame here, that's just the industry, that's how all video games are now, they take longer to make. 2, more games from the same anime, and 3, more games within the same genre. And no matter how good Naruto Storm Connections ends up being, it's another Naruto game and it's another arena fighter. Some fans will be happy, sure, I mean that's why it's called playing it safe. We know there are Naruto fans out there and we know that this genre also sells well, but it's much less impressive now because it's a show that we've seen in game form many times before and a genre that's been done a lot too. So it's not that the game is going to be worse, it just doesn't feel fresh. There's something magical about the first time you get to control a character that so far you've only seen on the screen, watching your favorite show. We recently felt it with Demon Slayer. This was the first time that you could play and control Tanjiro, Rengoku, Akaza. You're doing the moves that you saw on screen and there's a certain kind of magic to it. That magic also existed at some point for Naruto. I'm doing the Rasengan, that's awesome. But nowadays, for me at least, that is completely gone at this point. And it's not that the games got worse, it's that they're less surprising, because we've already seen it 1,000 times. They don't feel new, and therefore, not as exciting. Okay, so that might explain the big AAA games, the biggest hitters, sure. But there used to be a lot of smaller stuff too that doesn't take ages to develop. What happened to those games? Great question, Tim. The ecosystem changed. Previously, you had the home consoles, and on the side, you had those smaller games being developed by the handheld consoles. Which, yeah, you could just spit a bunch of garbage into those systems just to keep a license. Nowadays, handhelds are pretty much extinct. I mean, you have hybrids like the Switch or the Steam Deck, but no one's developing a game for handheld only anymore. Everything that's developed for handheld is also supposed to work as a home console game. And in my opinion, that was a great shift in the industry. But what we got as a result was, instead of handhelds, we got a ton of mobile. Mobile has become the new low-risk, high-reward game. And the reward is so high, in fact, that very often publishers feel like there's not even a point at attempting a console game, when profits will just be so much higher in mobile. That's what the industry evolved towards. If anime games were cash grabs, meaning cheap to develop and profitable because it capitalizes on fan hype, then what better place for these anime games to live than the mobile market? It just makes so much sense. This is where gacha games are widely accepted. You can exploit that fandom to pull for their favorite characters, and you know what? It works really well. There's definitely an audience out there that not only accepts this model, they love it. They love it more than console games. And the result has actually been very interesting to see, because you'd think we'd see more and more low-effort cash grabs thanks to the success of mobile games, but instead the quality of anime games on mobile has been leveling up so much. As more mobile games came out, there was more competition, and now we have games like Black Clover, Genshin Impact, and a few others that look fantastic and are doing some very interesting things in the space. So much so that these games actually look a lot better than many console games out there. But this competition exists because, turns out, being free doesn't really matter too much. When there are this many options, the real currency is players' time. That's what everyone is fighting for, which is just as valuable as a player's money. And so, the result has been more and more competent developers joining the mobile game space, and games looking so much better over time. And if you're not a fan of that genre, it can just feel like a whole slice of the industry just disappeared. When in fact, it just moved to a space that maybe you're not a fan of. Okay, so long story short, are anime games worse than before? In my opinion, no, but there are a lot less of them, which means it may be harder to find something that you like. And also, we're all smarter people now. I mean, we've played video games growing up, and we know what we like and don't like way better now than back when we were kids. And so we're perhaps pickier, as we should be, but I do think that overall the quality has been improving. Naruto movement went from this to this. Dragon Ball fighting games went from this to this. One Piece RPGs went from this to this. Even Black Clover, which went from this into a really good looking mobile RPG. And J-Stars became Jump Force. Okay, so maybe not everything got better. Fighting games are also going through something of a big shift, and I think Project L has a lot to do with it. Here's how that game will change the entire genre once it comes out. Thanks for watching. Bye.